It's Holmes from Storybooks, and today I will talk to you about the Black queer books that I read in June of 2020. I read fiction, memoirs, and poetry, so let's get into the books. The first book I read in June was Romance in Marseille by Claude McKay. Romance in Marseille by Claude McKay I read for my 20th Century Queer project for the year 1930. A startling beginning, La Fala, our protagonist, wakes up in a hospital bed after losing his legs to frostbite. He lost his legs to frostbite after being discovered as a stowaway on a ship, then after settling with the shipping company, suddenly he becomes a very rich man. One of the things that I appreciated the most was the wide and vibrant cast of characters McKay presents: Jamaican, Senegalese, African American, white, Nigerian characters from Marrakesh. He renders a seaport in all of its vivid, messy color. I listened to this as an audiobook, so I was lucky enough to have a narrator who changed his voice for the different characters, and that really added to my experience for me, even if the voice of one of the main characters, Aslima, was difficult for me to hear at times. This novel tackles blackness, disability, queerness, classism, communism, socialism, capitalism, all with a deft, brief hand. It's wild, zany, full of revenge, vengeance, and characters who thirst for money. I couldn't help but think it reminded me a little of a Coen Brothers film in its tone. I think even though this novel was incredibly ahead of its time, it is different than how it was marketed or how I feel like modern activists assume it might be. The Fall was based on a real person of McKay's acquaintance, a Nigerian seaman named Nelson Simeon Dede, so perhaps that's why the novel feels so lived in. McKay, while being sympathetic to the main character, doesn't let him get away with much. There are times when he is not particularly likable as a main character or trustworthy, but I was fond of him anyway. Is it unfinished? Absolutely. Does it have its problems, its better parts, its worse parts? Yes. There was a period in this novel where I really wanted everyone to just do something, but for all the novel's faults, it really grew on me. Skeptical, sweet, and sweeping. If this is what McKay can do with an unfinished draft, I'd love to read more of his polished work. I gave it 4 stars. Then I read How We Fight for Our Lives by Saeed Jones. I totally had a review written for this book, and then I totally just deleted it and tried again because I realized the first review didn't actually say anything about the book. It is stunning, queer, and beautiful. This is a tough review to write. Jones's memoir really left me speechless, quite literally. Brilliant, luminous, intense, searing, authentic, unflinching, but also compassionate, tender, and even sweet. How can one author so skillfully turn a life into fragments of poetry? There were parts of this book where I was emotional, even where I cried. This book is a memoir about Saeed and his mother, his sexuality, about coming of age, about photos of friends tucked into James Baldwin novels. Each chapter built onto the other so that by the end I was reading this really compulsively. There would be a chapter where Saeed Jones would share some of his deep trauma, and then in the next chapter he'd just have a phone call with his mom that was so domestic and so full of love. It really affected me. Buy this book for yourself, for your parents, for your friends. I'm not surprised the author won the Lambda Literary Award at all. You could give this book every award ever, and it would not even hold a candle to this achievement. 5 stars. After Romance in Marseille, I was really enjoying Harlem Renaissance literature, so I read Passing by Nella Larsen, without a doubt one of the best books that I've read this year, and for my 20th Century Queer project for the year 1929. Everything about this novel is so well crafted. The beat, the pacing, the tone, the dialogue, the inner reflections of the characters, everything. A book where every word, every sentence is so layered, so heavy with meaning, but manages to stay light and playful and almost conversational. This book is so elegant, so classy, so captivating. It explores racism, not only on a societal level, but through microaggressions the characters commit to themselves and to each other. It explores sexism, class, queerness, desire, motherhood, colorism, independence. My God. It focuses on the compelling interactions and fraught friendship of 2 characters, Irene Redfield and her friend Claire. Each time they come into contact, a domestic suspense novel unfolds like none I've ever read before. Nella Larsen wrote a book about Black femme desire at a time when it was not allowed. She did it so carefully and with such care, skirting around the politics of Black respectability to give the story Claire and Irene deserved. Irene thinks of Claire often, disparaging her a multitude of sins. And then Claire appears, and she is the most beautiful woman Irene has ever seen, beautiful enough, surely, to tempt her husband. In one scene, Claire appears, quote, exquisite, golden, fragrant, flaunting, in a stately gown of black tulle, unquote. And then Claire is described as, quote, just a shade too good looking, unquote. Sorry, if you can hear that, there is a magpie in my yard that likes to yell at my cat every once in a while, so that's a thing. When Irene refuses for a multitude of reasons not to answer Claire's letters, she, quote, calls to the post office every day to ask about your letter. The postmaster must have thought I was having an affair, unquote. Each time the two characters meet, they circle each other a little more, again, drawn together, irresistibly by the fates that they are trapped in, by the hand society has dealt them, the craft, the skill. The more I think on it, the more I love it. I called my dad a little while ago and gushed about it so much that he bought himself a copy and one for me as well. Thanks, Dad. Irresistible, delicious, urgent. Passing is one of my favorite books of 2020 thus far. 5 stars. Here for It, or How to Save Your Soul in America by R. Eric Thomas. This is a witty, wise memoir full of references to Whitney Houston and messy lived experiences. I really enjoyed this one. It's gentle, joyful, and queer. I loved his sense of humor as well as his sense of impending doom because, honestly, same. I struggled with the chapters on faith and queerness as the author did because my relationship with faith and queerness is an old wound for me. So if you struggle with faith, know that that's in there. Handled artfully, of course. Thomas leans into his discomfort in a masterful way. A delight to listen to. I can only say that I'm here for it, and I gave it 4 stars. The Tradition by Jericho Brown. The Tradition by Jericho Brown explores the banality of evil, of murder, and everyday dangers to Black queer bodies in America. It's hard to review this book without leaving a series of cliches one after the other. Each poem had a truly beautiful line in it. I was able to see many of the poems like paintings, muddy sketches at first, and then at the end line all pulled together like a final stitch in a piece of embroidery. How do you describe how beautiful the stars are? They're beautiful on their own, but also together, or the ocean, or the air. Truly exceptional poetry. I'd love to read a physical copy of this so I can see how he plays with form, structure, and rhythm. I'd love to read more of his work. Give this man more than the Pulitzer Prize for poetry. He deserves it. In the dream where I am an island, I grow green with hope. I'd like to end there. End quote. I gave it 4 stars. All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. All Boys Aren't Blue is a young adult nonfiction novel that I think easily fills the space between teaching and storytelling. There are so many rainbow books all about pronouns, identities, sexualities that provide a variety of stories and definitions about queer and trans culture, but Johnson deftly weaves the story of his life into these little teachable moments. Through trauma and triumph, the author calls into question the binaries and systems that define us, that cause us to be closeted, that cause us to feel unsafe. Deeply honest, questioning, and warm, the author pulls apart his life to reveal profound prophetic messages for queer Black youth. A valuable book that dismantles toxic masculinity, racism, queerphobia, internalized or otherwise, while celebrating familial love, loyalty, and the author's own strengths. This book is a message in a bottle, and my only hope is that it will wash up on the shores of those who need it most. I gave it 4 stars. The Deep by River Solomon is a book with a truly beautiful concept. Enslaved African women were thrown overboard on slave ships, and their unborn children became the Wajinru, inhabitants of the deep, the deepest part of the ocean. Holy shit, what a concept! Themes of trauma, kinship, loneliness, resilience, memory, and love abound. The protagonist, Yetu, serves as the Wajinru's historian, the designated being who remembers all of the Wajinru's painful history. The weight of the memories is killing her, consuming her. During a ceremony where Yetu allows all the other Wajinru to experience the memories, she flees to the surface. A large part of this novella was exposition, which I was okay with. I liked the concept and I liked Yetu, but how does a novel meander? There are only so many long passages of front fins, electrical pulses, and telepathy that I could navigate before I feel like the reader was just being inundated with conversations about how characters were supposed to be emoting. About 3/4 of the way through, there's a romance that just seems pushed in there that just feels rushed and hard to believe. I love a romance, and I'm not opposed to insta-love as a trope, but this and Yatu's love interest did not have enough time to develop at all. I think my biggest issue with this book was the pacing. In almost every chapter, Yetu or another character has a profound moment, and instead of being able to feel the weight of that moment, the book felt chaotic, stopping and starting, hurtling towards the end. Characters were introduced and left the book never to be seen again, with no closure or acknowledgement of their existence. The book is told in fragmented moments, skipping through time, which is how trauma disrupts or changes memories, so it makes sense that the author would use this mechanism to tell the story. However, I would spend so much time trying to figure out who was who and where we were in each chapter that I lost parts of the narrative and went back to reread the book in its physical form to try and decipher the book. A solid concept, and one I'm sad I didn't enjoy or like even more. I give it 3 stars. Then Scrib decided to remove most of my books that I wanted to read for 12 days until the end of June, which was weird. This really threw a wrench in my TBR, so I went hunting and I found Rummage by Ife Chudeni Oputa. Lingering, dark, disturbing, visceral. I picked up this poetry collection on a whim, and although some of the collection was a little hard to follow, the metaphors sometimes ran away from me, it was really compulsively readable and had a style all its own. It's also queer. Trigger warnings, although I'm not precisely sure what for, but the images can be really heavy and disturbing. This debut poetry collection focuses on girlhood, coming of age, sex, first love, blame, shame, humiliation, and everything else in between. It seems to be a really divisive read. People either love the language or they find it way too intense. I gave it 3 stars. The books I'm currently reading are Bone Black, Memoirs of a Girlhood by Bell Hooks. This is a lyrical, powerful memoir. I'm not 100% sure if she's queer, but I read 1 chapter a night, which is only 1 or 2 pages, and I really just bask in her skill as a storyteller. She tells stories of her childhood, how she grew up, how she battled with society's expectations of her. I'm also reading Stranger Brother by Blair Niles. This is a 1930s queer novel with a black protagonist that I'm reading for my 20th Century Queer project. It's a pretty rare book, so I was so grateful to find it for a reasonable price on Abe Books. This book was one of the first books to feature a black queer protagonist. His name is Mark Thornton, and he meets June Westbrook, a young woman who falls in love with Harlem. Over a long, steamy summer, Mark allows more and more of his identity to be revealed. The book is desperately tragic, but this book is one of a kind, so I have to read it. The last book I'm reading is B-Boy Blues by James L. Hardy. I'm reading this for my 20th Century Queer project for the 90s. This book is all about black queer men navigating love and relationships. It's supposed to be hilarious, and I really don't hear that many people talking about it on the bookish internet. Some reviews say that it's really dated and the fat jokes were kind of exhausting. Other people say that it's way too sexy, and some people absolutely adore it. The one person I have heard talk about it is Luxurious Blue. I'll link some videos where he talks about this book down below. I really feel like I need a book like this. I need something light, easy to read. Despite having such a good reading month with so many favorites and 5-star reads, I definitely feel a reading slump coming on. That's not the fault of the books, that's just my brain and this pandemic, but I feel like maybe I can skip this reading slump with this book. What books did you read this month? Let's talk in the comments below. Bye everyone!